is based on the work of Max Heindel. He was an early 19th century mystic, but perhaps the following is a better explanation. Max Heindel, spiritual initiate and messenger of the Rosicrucian Brotherhood, was born in Denmark on July 23, 1865. He became a shipping engineer and eventually immigrated to the United States. By 1905, he had become seriously interested in the study of metaphysics and spent the next few years consciously working and searching for spiritual truths. When he was visiting Germany in 1907, the elder brother of the Rose Cross, who became his teacher, made contact with him on the inner planes. He was instructed in the etheric temple of the Rose Cross, receiving the occult teachings that he eventually incorporated into the Rosicrucian Cosmo-Conception, published in November 1909. He founded the Rosicrucian Fellowship in August 1909 and spent his remaining years until January 6, 1919, writing, lecturing, establishing fellowship headquarters in Oceanside, California, and generally spreading the teachings of esoteric Christianity, the pioneer spiritual teachings which will prepare all humanity for the new age of Aquarius, when all nations will join in universal brotherhood. I have studied many ancient texts and occult writings, and I personally find this work fascinating as it interlinks with many other teachings, but from an occult science perspective, it tries to be objective in its descriptions, which I find refreshing. The following are questions and answers that Heindel often faced during his many lecture tours and while teaching followers of the Brotherhood. From this point on are some of the questions with answers mentioned above. Questions dealing with life on earth. Question 1. If we were pure spirit and a part of an all-knowing God, why was it necessary for us to take this long pilgrimage of sin and sorrow through matter? Answer. In the beginning of manifestation, God differentiated within himself a multitude of potential spiritual intelligences, as sparks are emitted by a fire. Note by narrator. Edgar Cayce, when asked where our soul comes from, talked about the same spark concept as Heindel. This, of course, was some 35 years after Heindel. Now back to the answer. These spiritual intelligences were potential flames or fires, but they were not yet fires, for though endowed with the all-consciousness of God, they lacked self-consciousness. Being potentially omnipotent as God, they lacked dynamic power, available for use at any moment, according to their will. And in order that these qualities might be evolved, it was imperative that they should go through matter. Therefore, during involution, each divine spark was encased in various vehicles of sufficient density to shut off the outer world from its consciousness. Then the spirit within, no longer able to contact the without, turns and finds itself. With wakening self-consciousness comes the spirit's struggle to free itself from its prison, and during evolution, the various vehicles which the spirit possesses will be spiritualized into soul, so that at the end of manifestation, the spirit will not only have gained self-consciousness, but also soul power. There is a tendency upon the part of most people to believe that all that is the result of something else, leaving no place for any original new building. Those who study life usually speak only of involution and evolution. Those who study the form, namely the modern scientists, are concerned with evolution only. But the most advanced among them are now beginning to find another factor, which they have called epigenesis. In 1757, Caspar Wolff issued his Theoria Generationis, wherein he showed that in the development of the ovum, there are a series of new buildings, not at all foreshown by what has gone before, and Haeckel, endorsing this work, says that nowadays we are no longer justified in calling epigenesis a mere theory, for it is a fact which we may demonstrate in the case of the lower forms where the changes are rapid, under a microscope. Since the mind was given to man, it is this original creative impulse, epigenesis, which has been the cause of all our development. Note by narrator. Dr. Bruce Lipton is a modern 21st century scientist who promotes this theory and has supported it through research some 120 years after Heindel speaks of it. Back to the answer. Truly do we build upon that which has been already created. But there is also something new due to the activity of the Spirit, and thus it is that we become creators. For if we only imitated that which had already been laid out for us by God or angel, it would never be possible for us to become creative intelligences. We would simply be imitators. And even though we make mistakes, it may be said that we often learn much more by our mistakes than by our successes. The sin and the suffering which the inquirer speaks about are merely the result of the mistakes we make, and their impression upon our consciousness causes us to be active along other lines which are found to be good, that is to say, in harmony with nature. Thus this world is a training school and not a vale of tears wherein we have been placed by a capricious God. Question 2. If God made man a little lower than the angels, how is it possible that man is ultimately to become their superior in the spiritual world? Answer. This question reveals a misunderstanding on the part of the inquirer. It has never been stated in the Rosicrucian teachings, but something has been said which may have been misconstrued. The fact of the matter is that evolution moves in an upward spiral, and there is never a repetition of the same condition. Angels are an earlier stream of evolution who were human in a previous incarnation of the earth called the Moon period among Rosicrucians. The archangels were the humanity of the Sun period, and the lords of mind, called by Paul the powers of darkness, were the humanity of the dark Saturn period. We are the humanity of the fourth period of the present scheme of manifestation, the Earth period. As all beings in the universe are progressing, the humanity of the previous periods have also progressed so that they are now at a higher stage than they were when they were human. They are superhuman. Therefore, it is perfectly true that God made man a little lower than the angels. But as everything is in a state of spiral progression, it is also true that our present humanity is a higher and more evolved humanity than the angels were, and that the angels were a higher order of humanity than the archangels were when they were human. In the next step, we shall attain something like the stage of the angels at the present time, but we shall be superior to what they are now. Question 3. Why should it be necessary for us to come into this physical existence? Could we not have learned the same lessons without being imprisoned and limited by the dense conditions of the material world? Answer. The New Testament was written in Greek originally, and the word logos means both word and the thought which precedes the word. So that when John tells us in the first chapter of his gospel that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, we may also translate the verse, in the beginning was the thought, and the Word was with God, and God was the Word. Everything exists by virtue of that fact. In that is life. Everything that exists in the universe was first a thought, that thought then manifesting as a word, a sound which built all forms and itself manifested as the life within those forms. That is the process of creation, and man, who is made in the image of God, creates in the same way to a certain extent. He has the capability of thinking. He may voice his thoughts, and in that way, where he is not capable of carrying out his ideas alone, he may secure the help of others to realize them. But a time is coming when he will create directly by the word of his mouth, and he is now learning to create by other means, so that when in time he becomes able to use his word to create directly, he will know how. That training is absolutely necessary. At the present time he would make many mistakes. Besides, he is not yet good. He would bring into being demoniac creations. In the earliest dawn of man's endeavour, he used the solids. Muscular force was his only means of performing work, and from bones and stones which he picked up from the ground, he shaped his first crude instruments to be wielded by his arm. Then came a time when in a crude dugout he first trusted himself to the waters, a liquid, and the water wheel was the first machinery. The liquid is already much stronger than the solid. A wave will raise the decks of a ship, tear out masts, and twist the stoutest iron bar as if it were a thin wire, but water power is a stationary force and therefore limited to work in its immediate vicinity. When man learned to use the still more subtle force which we call air, it became possible for him to erect windmills in any place to do his work, and sailing vessels brought the whole world into communication. Thus, man's next step in unfoldment was achieved by the use of a force still subtler than water and more universally applicable than that element. But wind was fickle and not to be depended upon. Therefore, the advancement in human civilization achieved by its use paled into insignificance when man discovered how to utilize the still more subtle gas, which is called steam, for that can be made anywhere and everywhere, and the progress of the world has been enormous since its advent. There is, however, the drawback to its utility, that steam power requires cumbersome transmission machinery. This drawback is practically eliminated by using a still subtler force, more readily transmissible electricity, which is altogether invisible and intangible. Thus we see that the progress of man in the past has depended upon the utilization of forces of increasing subtlety, each force in the scale being more readily capable of transmission than the ones previously available, and we can readily realize that further progress depends upon the discovery of still finer forces transmissible with still greater facility. We know that that which we call wireless telegraphy is accomplished without even the use of wires, but even that system is not ideal, for it depends upon energy generated in a central plant, which is stationary. It involves the use of costly machinery and is, therefore, out of reach of the majority. The ideal force would be a power which man could generate from himself at any moment without machinery. Many years ago, Jules Verne thrilled us with delight when he conjured up before our imagination the submarine boat, the trip around the earth in 80 days, etc. Today, the things he pictured have become facts surpassing even his imagination, and the day will come when we shall have available for use a power plant such as spoken of above. Bulwer Lytton, in his Coming Race, has pictured to us a force called vril, which certain imaginary beings are possessed of and which they can use to propel themselves over land, through the air and in various other ways. Such a force is latent within every one of us, and we speak of it sometimes as emotion. We feel its far-reaching power at times as temper when it is unleashed, and say a man has lost control of himself. No amount of work can so tire the physical body and wreck it as when the enormous energy of the desire body is let loose in a fit of temper. Usually, at the present time, this enormous force sleeps, and it is well that it should be so until we have learned to use it by means of thought, which is a still more subtle force. This world is a school to teach us how to think and feel aright, so that we may become qualified to use these two subtle forces, the power of thought and the power of emotion. An illustration will make clear how this world serves that purpose. An inventor gets an idea. The idea is not yet a thought, it is but, as it were, a flash which has not yet taken shape, but gradually he visualizes it in mind stuff. He forms in his thought a machine, and before his mental vision that machine appears with the wheels revolving this way and that as necessary to accomplish the required work. Then he commences to draw the plans for the machine, and even at that stage of concretion it will most certainly appear that modifications are necessary. Thus we see that already the physical conditions show the inventor where his thought was not correct. When he builds the machine in appropriate material for the accomplishment of the work, there are usually more modifications necessary. Perhaps he may be obliged to throw the first machine away, entirely rearrange his conception and build a new machine. Thus, the concrete physical conditions have enabled him to detect the flaw in his reasoning. They force him to make the necessary modifications in his original thought to bring out a machine that will do the work. Had there been only a world of thought, he would not have known that he had made a mistake, but the concrete physical conditions show him where his thought was wrong. The physical world teaches the inventor to think aright, and his successful machines are the embodiments of right thought. In mercantile, social or philanthropic endeavours, the same principle holds good. If our ideas concerning the various matters in life are wrong, they are corrected when brought into so-called practical uses, and thus this world is an absolute necessity to teach us how to wield the power of thought and desire, these forces being held in leash to a great extent at the present time by our material conditions. But as time goes on and we learn to think aright more and more, we shall at last obtain such a power of thought, and we shall be able to think the right thought at once in every case without experimenting, and then we shall also be able to speak our thought into actual being as a thing. There was a time in the far, far past when man was yet a spiritual being and when the conditions of earth were more plastic. Then he was taught directly by the gods to use the word as a means of creation, and he worked thus formatively on the animals and the plants. We are told in the Bible that God brought the animals to man, and he named them. This naming was not simply calling a lion, but it was a formative process that gave man a power over the thing he named, and it was only when selfishness, cruelty, and unbridled anger unfitted him for the mastership that the word of power spoken of by the Masons was lost. When holiness shall have again taken the place of profanity, the word will be found again, and will be the creative power of the divine man in a future age.